And we are back. So, with Hard to Kill having a very significant match type with a world champion from another promotion in there, I want to talk about inter-promotional matches over the course of the years. This one I really love because of where it was and how this happened. Teddy Roosevelt, a president that was very macho, he challenged Frank Gotch to a jiu-jitsu fight against one of his Japanese ambassadors because that Japanese ambassador was a jiu-jitsu black belt. Mm-hmm. The fight was jiu-jitsu, but the point of it that Theodore Roosevelt wanted to know what style was superior. So they they cleared the furniture out of the East Hall of the White House, and they fought in the White House in front of Teddy Roosevelt. Gotch won with 3 very quick submissions. Teddy Roosevelt wanted to wrestle, but at this time, the then Secret Service, I can't remember what they were called, they said, don't bother doing it. So it probably wouldn't have been a great idea because this was also Frank Gotch, who actually in Japan, kind of going back to this, he was a huge influence in Japanese wrestling. He was called the God of Wrestling in Japan. Fun fact. So let's go to this is the 60s. Superstar Billy Graham at this point was the WWF World Champion, and he faced Harley Race, who was the NWA World Heavyweight Champion, in a title unification match. It was a 2 out of 3 falls. It was presented by the Championship Wrestling from Florida, which was a very old promotion in Florida, obviously. And it was a 1-hour draw. God, I would have paid money to be a fly on the wall of that match. Here's one a little bit. In 1993 at Wrestling Dondaku, then WWF champion Hulk Hogan took on IWGP champion the Great Muta. And I believe Hulk Hogan won that one because he was still very popular in Japan. You know, obviously him being the first IWGP champion, he has a huge influence there. Now let's talk about the big one. One of them that this thumbnail's based on. The War of the Worlds, June 26th, 1976. It was Special Fight Rules, and many see this as the precursor to modern MMA. Antonio Inoki, Muhammad Ali. Gene LaBelle, who was a very accomplished grappler himself, was the referee for this. And the fight went to a draw because Inoki basically kicked Muhammad Ali's leg. He kicked his leg 107 times. The impact of this got to a point where Muhammad Ali, they were actually talking about having to amputate Muhammad Ali's leg.
Jesus.
It was that many times and that forceful. I don't think people realize how big this was. This was McGregor Mayweather in the 70s. This was huge. And this was also around the time of the collision in Korea. Uh-huh. So a lot of good stuff there. Uh-huh. Madison Square Garden in 1980 had a very special match. Another Harley Race, who was, again, NWA World Champion. He took on WWF Champion Bob Backlund. And it was a DQ. So both of them, disqualification to stay face, because both of them were very, very popular in their respective areas, and nobody wanted to lose in Madison Square Garden at the time. Backlund also faced AWA champion Nick Bockwinkel in 1979 in Toronto, Canada, and once again, to keep them protected, that ended in a double countout. We're going to go back to Japan. Wrestle Kingdom 2. Kurt Angle versus Yuji Nagata for the IWGP third belt. So we'll talk about the third belt later. Roddy Piper's infamous matches with Mr. T at both WrestleManias was a big one, especially the boxing match. Akibono and the Big Show's match at WrestleMania 21 was also a big one. I don't think people realize how big Akibono was. He was the first Gaijin sumo to reach the exalted rank of Yokozuna in 1993. He started his wrestling career, and he started a MMA career around this time, so there was a lot of talk of Akebono at this time. Shinsuke Nakamura faced Kurt Angle to unify the IWGP third belt and the IWGP heavyweight champion on February 17th, 2008. You would believe that this would have been a match for Wrestle Kingdom, but this was a very young, not Michael Jackson-esque Shinsuke Nakamura. Obviously, they still put a lot of emphasis on his push. Big Show's infamous match with Floyd Mayweather at WrestleMania 24 in 2008. For some reason, the network has removed that WrestleMania recently. I have no idea why. Antonio Inoki and Ric Flair's big collision in Korea, which was in, it was in North Korea.
Yeah.
Largest live attendance for any wrestling show ever. And
I'm pretty sure all of them had to go there.
Yes, and Antonio Inoki won.
Hooray.
And obviously, when Dark Side of the Ring comes out, with this, we will be doing our reviews for those shows.
Hooray.
This one, it was not a one person in one and one person in another. This was a championship match on another show. So this one is kind of unique. Buff Bagwell versus Booker T, July 2001's edition of WWF Raw.
Okay.
This was for the WCW Championship.
I see.
And they did everything. They replaced the turnbuckle, the ring ropes. They had a different style of announcing. They had totally new announcers.
Right.
The match itself was okay. But the problem is that at this time, the tensions between them were still really, really hot. Obviously, WCW was bought out, but the WWF conditioned their fans to hate everything WCW.
Right.
But the point of this match was to reintroduce WCW as its own brand under the WWF banner and only run in the South. But the problem was, I think they did this in Topeka, Kansas. If you wanted to do something like this, do this in fucking Atlanta. Because then you would actually have the response you wanted.
Right.
Obviously, the crowd had none of this match. They were silent and they booed. And when Steve Austin and Kurt Angle interfered, huge pop. McMahon threw the original plan right out of the gate. We got the horrible invasion angle. And Buff Bagwell was fired immediately after this match.
Right.
And Booker T went on to do fairly well. So now this was another huge one because nobody thought this could happen. When Ric Flair was fired from WCW in 1991, but he still had possession of the big gold belt, which was the WCW heavyweight champion.
Right.
So WWF at the time picked him up and said, bring the title to the show. They, with Bobby the Brain Heenan, was holding the WCW champion on WWF television, and he called himself the real world's champion. After a while, they had to change the championship to a replica of the tag team champions, because that one was the one that closest resembled the title. And because WCW sued the WWF and had the belt returned, but WCW had to pay Flair $20,000 for the deposit of the championship.
Right.
Because that's how that worked. In 2012, Christian Cage made an appearance in TNA. He was signed with WWE at the time, but this was a very rare talent exchange. There wasn't a match, but he was there to introduce, I think, like the TNA moment of the decade, or the year at that time, because Ric Flair signed with TNA, went to the Hall of Fame because the Four Horsemen were being inducted. Obviously, you cannot induct the Horsemen without Ric Flair. Obviously. Now, this one, I love. I love this one because it is a WWF wrestler versus a WCW wrestler for the ECW champion. Taz versus Mike Awesome. Mike Awesome was the champion at the time, but signed a WCW contract behind ECW's back.
Huh.
I don't like to speak ill will of the dead, but Mike Awesome, that was an incorrect decision. Paul Heyman had a working relationship with the WWF at the time,
Right.
and asked if they could have Taz win it because Mike Awesome was being a stickler on who he would lose it to.
Right.
He had to, it was basically a shoot match.
Right.
But this was, and then Taz dropped the belt to Tommy Dreamer after that.
Right.
And I'm going to end this one with another amazing talent exchange that I never saw coming ever. Brock Lesnar, who was signed to the WWE, versus Mark Hunt at UFC 200. The ending of that, people lost their minds because Brock Lesnar, the commercial for it at the end was, "Can you see me now?" Do you remember social media? It blew up because Lesnar was shown. It's like, this is Brock Lesnar, like the man for WWE going to fight. Obviously, Lesnar won, but he popped for steroids or performance-enhancing drugs.
Right.
Mark Hunt is still currently in lawsuits with the UFC over this decision. But there is some I love interpromotional stuff when companies can work together like this. And with Hard to Kill, obviously doing that, I really can see a lot more of this happening. So when we come back, we're going to talk about Hard to Kill.
All right.